Now, onto a function that we call circumstance. Entities are things, actions are what happened in their making, entities and actions, the one thing can't happen without the other. Let's take an example from one of the greatest works of Isaac Newton, the famous English scientist and mathematician. One of Newton's great achievements was to explain the spectral decomposition of light. When light shines through a prism, it is refracted into all the colours of the rainbow. White light is made up of a whole lot of different colours. This is the title page of the 1704 edition of Newton's Optics. I want to show you how Newton says this. The way he says this contributes to a practice of seeing and thinking the world that we now call science. In text, we might write the word light as a noun or a verb. As a noun, light comes from the sun and into the prism, but as a verb, the sun lights through the prism. So nouns and verbs are not so much really different things because the one can easily become another. We just saw it happening with light. But of course, they are both at the same time the same and very different. And to use the terminology we've been developing in this grammar, these are not just two distinct things, but they're transposable meanings. Each of noun and verb is not a thing, but it's a kind of readiness, the one ready to become the other. Now here is how Newton, in his book, represents entities and actions in diagrams. A number of entities are represented in these diagrams. There's an eye, and there is some prism, and there are some rays of light. This is the stuff of light as a kind of, if you like, a visual noun. But there's also movement here in those images, indicated by the lines from a light source to its destination. This is light as a kind of visual verb, if you like. So in this visual language, entities are represented by points and volumes, actions by vectors. As an interesting aside, by the way, looking at these particular diagrams and thinking about the affordances of media and how they affect meaning, in the era of letterpress printing, it was more convenient to put images on different pages in the book than the pages that have got text, because the technology for letterpress reproduction was different from the technology for printing diagrams. So in the text, Newton uses these letter labels to refer to the image. So in the text he might say C point F in figure 12. This is a particular kind of multimodal image-text relationship that has become essential to modern science, making the same meanings about light, in this case, in both text and image, but using one form of meaning to supplement the other to form a cohesive whole. The cohesive whole is called science. Now let's look at some of Newton's text. Watch the red words. For it has been proved that the changes of colours made by refractions do not arise from any new modifications of the rays impressed by those refractions and by the various terminations of light and shadow. It has been shown also that the sun's light is mixed of all sorts of rays, so its whiteness is a mixture of the colours of all sorts of rays. It may be concluded that the white colour of all refracted light is in the very first emergence, where it appears as white before the instance is compounded of various colours. Okay, that's talking science. So what we've done now is we've taken the red words, which are Newton's words on the right, and we've thought where those words come from as types of action. So the white words are all actions that Newton has turned into entities, the red words. This is a process that in text is called nominalization. This is a typical move of science. By thingifying actions, it makes whatever is being referred to sound objective. Newton is one of the inventors of this kind of discourse. If you are a science teacher, by the way, tell your students to turn the main verbs they're using into nouns and they will get a better mark. Refraction occurred when the light passed through the prism sounds much more scientific than a sentence like, we refracted light through the prism. This is another space where the grammar of text becomes quite different from the grammar of speech. Speech is action-oriented, scientific and academic language is entity-oriented.
Let's take a more contemporary example. In this case, the representation that a developer may use in order to design software for selling theatre tickets. The diagram you see here is expressed in UML, or what's called Unified Modelling Language. This is a multimodal text with image where the boxes do the job of representing entities, customers, reservations, tickets, and performance, and the lines indicate actions, A customer makes a reservation. The theatre gives them a ticket. The customer goes to the performance. Then, of course, if we are designing software, we expect there will be a multimodal transposability of the scenario mapped in the image plus text in UML into the configuration of spaces, the box office in the foyer, the flows from the box office into the theatre, involving objects, the tickets and their printing. Where there are certain kinds of enactments, the person who is visibly the ticket seller, the handing of the ticket to the theatre goer. These are transpositions across the horizontal axis of our grammar, things which make no sense if they are not transposable in multimodal practice. Going back to the text, image representation of the theatre going, let me say as an aside, this is yet another example of how different text is from speech. Oral instructions would be completely inadequate for a software developer. First this, next that, finally something else. Speech is relentlessly temporal. In order to think through this scenario, I need this kind of text-image alliance. We need to spatialize meaning. This is how it becomes possible to anticipate a number of repeatable variables across many similar, though different contexts. Then, of course, the software needs to be tested, and we have to go back to the theatre for that. So, what are we saying here? Philosophers of meaning have grappled with the entity-action tension. Alfred North Whitehead, English mathematician and philosopher and author, with Bertrand Russell of the Principles of Mathematics, said, "The language itself prioritizes objectification, where the subject as an object precedes and is separated from the predicate as an action. As a consequence, we tend to atomize the extensive continuum of the world into separate entities. We analyze the world in terms of static categories. We spatialize a universe at the expense of fluency. We freeze moments in time at the expense of the life history of the object." French philosopher Henri Bergson said something similar, that the problem of philosophy to date has been to freeze reality into entities and their states for the purposes of construing it as facts, what the empiricists do, or concepts, what the rationalists do. So, he says, words deceive to the extent that they seem to denote changeless things. Conceptual analysis tends to freeze reality into entities. Images deceive to the extent that they freeze objects and persons in moments of time. Instead, we need to conceive reality in cinematic terms as movement and change. Now, we are saying something a bit different. We don't want to prioritize entities or actions as if they were distinct things, nouns as if they were so very different from verbs, points and volumes as if they were so very different from vectors, because the one has been the other and can always be the other again, any moment. We should focus on the movement, or what we call the transpositions. Here we are looking at the movement of the vertical or functional axis of our grammar diagram, where one function is impatient to become the other, in this case, entities and actions. So, when science objectifies, when it conceives an action as an entity, it does not create a thing, it makes a move.